Hey, tonight we're going to journey back to one of the roughest places in American history, the Wild West saloons of the 1870s. We'll explore what life was really like for the people who worked and lived in these frontier establishments, far from the Hollywood glamour you might imagine. It's a story of survival, hardship, and the human spirit in one of America's most challenging eras. Hey, if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. I'm curious where you're listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Now, find a cozy spot, take a slow, deep breath, and let your body sink into comfort as we journey back in time together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in Dodge City, Kansas on a sweltering afternoon in July 1875. The first thing that hits you isn't what you see, it's what you smell. The thick, cloying scent of unwashed bodies, stale tobacco, and something that might charitably be called whiskey, but smells more like paint thinner mixed with burnt sugar. Your eyes water slightly as the aroma fills your nostrils and you realize you're standing just outside the canvas flaps of what folks around here call a saloon. The good news is you're about to witness one of the most fascinating and complex social institutions of the American frontier. The bad news? Well, you're about to discover that life in these establishments was nothing like the romantic tales Hollywood would later tell. Let your shoulders relax as we step through those canvas flaps together, because you'll need to stay calm for what comes next. The saloon you're entering is basically a large tent stretched over a wooden frame, with rough pine boards laid across the dusty ground as flooring. The walls are just heavy canvas, and you can hear every conversation, every argument, every cough and spit from the dozens of men crowded inside this stifling space. Your feet sink slightly into the soft dirt that's managed to work its way up between the floorboards, and you can feel the grit between your teeth already. That's just how it is out here, where the wind never stops blowing dust across these endless Kansas plains. The air inside is thick and oppressive, heated by the July sun bearing down on the canvas roof and warmed further by the press of so many unwashed bodies. Take a moment to let your eyes adjust to the dim interior, because there's a lot to take in. Along one side of the tent, someone has constructed what passes for a bar, rough-hewn planks laid across wooden barrels with a few bottles of various shapes and colours arranged behind it. There's no mirror, no polished mahogany, no gleaming brass rail for men to rest their boots on. Just pine boards, sticky with spilled liquor and marked with countless knife cuts and burn scars from cigars. Behind the makeshift bar stands a man you'd guess to be in his 40s, though the hard frontier life makes it difficult to tell. His face is weathered like old leather, with deep lines around his eyes from squinting against the prairie sun. His shirt, once white, is now a dingy grey-yellow, and you notice dark stains under his arms that speak to the challenge of staying clean when water is precious and laundry means hauling everything down to the muddy Arkansas River. He's wiping glasses with a rag that's seen better decades, and as you watch, you realise that same rag is used to wipe the bar, clean up spills, and occasionally mop the sweat from his brow. The concept of sanitation, you quickly understand, is more of a luxury than a necessity in this time and place. When several men share the same glass throughout the evening, and that bar rag serves multiple purposes, germs spread as easily as gossip. Let your breathing slow and deepen as you take in the rest of this fascinating scene. Scattered throughout the tent are rough wooden tables, each one scarred and stained with years of use. Some are simply planks laid across sawhorses, while others are more elaborate affairs. Though elaborate here means they have 4 matching legs and don't wobble too badly when someone pounds a fist on them. At these tables, groups of men cluster around games of chance. There's something almost hypnotic about watching their hands move cards across the scarred wood, the soft whisper of shuffling, the gentle clink of coins and chips. The most popular game, you notice, isn't poker, as you might expect, but something called faro. It's a fast-paced banking game where players bet on which cards will appear, and the dealer, called a banker, operates a specially designed case that dispenses cards one at a time. The men playing Pharaoh have a particular intensity about them, a focused silence broken only by quick, muttered bets and the soft sigh of cards being revealed. You can see the appeal. It's simple enough for trail-weary cowboys to understand after a few drinks, but complex enough to keep their interest for hours. More importantly, it's a game where large sums can change hands quickly, which explains why the saloon owner is so eager to host these games and take his percentage of every pot. Feel the weight of the humid air as you notice the other patrons scattered throughout this canvas cathedral of frontier entertainment. There are cowboys, recognizable by their wide-brimmed hats and leather chaps, their faces burnt dark by months under the unforgiving prairie sun. You can see trail dust ground deep into the creases around their eyes and embedded under their fingernails. These men have just finished driving herds of longhorn cattle up from Texas, a journey that took months through every kind of weather you can imagine. Mixed among the cowboys are railroad workers, distinguishable by their blue denim overalls and the coal dust that seems permanently ground into their skin and clothes. They've been laying track across the endless Kansas grassland, backbreaking work that involves hauling heavy steel rails under the blazing sun, driving countless spikes into railroad ties with heavy sledgehammers until their hands are a mass of calluses and their backs ache constantly. There are miners too, men whose clothes carry the grey dust of distant silver claims and whose eyes hold that particular hollow look that comes from spending months underground in narrow, dangerous tunnels. Some are flush with recent discoveries, their pockets heavy with silver coins, while others are clearly down to their last few dollars, nursing a single drink and hoping their luck will change before morning. Allow your mind to settle as you observe the subtle social dynamics playing out in this tent. Despite what you might expect, there's a surprising amount of order here. The saloon owner, you realize, has a vested interest in keeping things relatively peaceful. Violence is bad for business. It scares away customers, breaks furniture that's expensive to replace, and attracts the attention of what little law enforcement exists in this frontier town. Near the back of the tent, you notice movement that catches your eye. There are women here, though not many, and their presence adds another layer of complexity to this social ecosystem. You see a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, moving between the tables with a tray of drinks. Her dress is simple but clean, a practical cotton affair in dark blue that doesn't show stains easily. Her hair is pinned up neatly, and while her face shows the wear of frontier life, she carries herself with a dignity that commands respect from the men around her. This is what they call a saloon girl, though that term covers a wide range of roles and circumstances. Her primary job is to encourage men to buy drinks and stay in the saloon longer, spending more money. She'll dance with customers for 25 cents a song, engage them in conversation, and generally brighten their evening. Contrary to what later movies would suggest, most saloon girls weren't prostitutes. They were entertainers and hostesses trying to make an honest living in a place where women's opportunities were severely limited. As you watch her work, you begin to understand the delicate balance she must maintain. She needs to be friendly enough to encourage spending, but not so friendly as to create expectations she can't or won't fulfill. She must navigate the often drunken advances of lonely men who haven't seen a woman in months while maintaining her safety and dignity. It's a performance that requires considerable skill, and you notice how she positions herself near other people, never isolated with a single customer, always maintaining escape routes to safer parts of the tent. Let the sounds of this place wash over you like a gentle tide. There's the constant murmur of conversation, punctuated occasionally by bursts of laughter or the sharp exclamation of someone winning or losing at cards. You hear the clink of bottles against glasses, the scrape of chairs on the rough wooden floor, and underneath it all, the soft whistle of prairie wind moving through the canvas walls. Someone in the corner has produced a harmonica and is playing a slow, melancholy tune that speaks of home and loneliness and vast distances travelled. The melody weaves through the other sounds, adding a touch of beauty to this rough environment. Other men hum along softly, and for a moment, the entire tent seems united in a shared recognition of how far they all are from anything resembling comfort or familiarity. The music reminds you that these men, despite their rough exterior, are far from home and often profoundly lonely. Many haven't seen their families in months or even years. Some have families back east they're working to support, sending most of their earnings home while living on beans and hardtack. Others are running from something. Debts, failed relationships, legal troubles, or simply the feeling that they didn't fit into the increasingly civilized Eastern society. Notice how your breathing has naturally slowed as you've become absorbed in observing this fascinating social tableau. There's something almost meditative about watching these men at their simple pleasures: cards, conversation, and the occasional sip of whatever passes for whiskey in this frontier establishment. Speaking of whiskey, you're curious about what exactly these men are drinking with such apparent enjoyment. The bottles behind the bar contain a variety of mysterious liquids, and you quickly learn that quality control is, well, let's just say it varies considerably. Much of what's called whiskey is actually rot gut, a concoction of raw grain alcohol mixed with whatever the proprietor has on hand to give it colour and flavour. The recipes are creative, to put it mildly. You might find burnt sugar for colour, chewing tobacco for flavour, and even stranger additions like turpentine, ammonia, or gunpowder. The goal isn't to create something delicious, but rather something strong enough to help men forget their troubles for a few hours. At 25 cents a shot, nearly $5 in today's money, it's not exactly cheap, but for men who've been working brutal jobs for months, it represents a few hours of relief from the hardships of frontier life. The beer is warm, of course, since refrigeration won't reach most of these frontier towns for another decade or more. It's stored at whatever temperature the tent happens to be, which on this July afternoon means it's roughly the same temperature as bath water. But the men don't seem to mind. Cold beer is a luxury they've learned to live without, along with so many other comforts that folks back east take for granted. As evening approaches and the sun begins to sink toward the western horizon, the atmosphere in the tent subtly shifts. The day's heat is finally beginning to ease, and a gentle breeze starts to move through the canvas walls, carrying with it the scents of prairie grass and distant wood smoke. Men who've been nursing single drinks all afternoon begin to order second rounds, and the conversation becomes more animated as the alcohol and the cooling air combine to lift spirits. Feel your body settling deeper into relaxation as you watch the simple ritual of men unwinding after hard days of labour. There's something timeless and somehow comforting about it, the universal human need for companionship, for a place to belong, for a few hours of pleasure after long days of toil. Despite the harsh conditions and rough circumstances, you can see genuine friendship and camaraderie developing among these frontier travellers. The saloon girl continues her graceful dance between tables, her tray somehow always balanced perfectly despite the uneven floor and the occasionally unsteady customer. You notice how the men treat her with a mixture of respect and protective concern. While there are certainly those who try to take liberties, the majority seem to understand that she's working hard to make an honest living and deserves to be treated accordingly. As the sun disappears completely and someone lights a few kerosene lanterns around the tent, the golden light creates dancing shadows on the canvas walls. The harsh edges of the day seem to soften, and even this rough frontier establishment takes on a certain warm intimacy. Men's voices drop to quieter tones, and the harmonica player switches to even gentler melodies that seem designed to ease the soul rather than energize the spirit. You realize you're witnessing something remarkable, a moment of peace and human connection in one of the harshest environments imaginable. These men have found a way to create community and comfort even here in this dusty tent on the edge of civilization. They've established their own codes of conduct, their own forms of entertainment, their own ways of caring for one another. As you prepare to rest and let these images settle in your mind, take a moment to appreciate the resilience of the human spirit. Despite facing challenges that would seem overwhelming to most of us today, isolation, physical hardship, uncertain futures, and very real dangers, these frontier people found ways to create joy, friendship, and meaning in their lives. The gentle sounds of the saloon continue around you as your eyelids grow heavy, the soft murmur of conversation, the whisper of cards being shuffled, the distant notes of that lonely harmonica. Let these sounds carry you toward peaceful sleep, knowing that tomorrow we'll continue exploring this fascinating world where survival required not just physical toughness, but the ability to find humanity and connection in the most unlikely places. As the night deepens and the kerosene lanterns cast their warm, flickering glow across the canvas walls, you begin to notice details that escaped your attention in the bright afternoon light. The saloon girl you've been watching, let's call her Mary, though her real name might be something entirely different, as many women in her position adopted new identities when they came west, moves with a practiced efficiency that speaks of months, perhaps years, of navigating this challenging world. You notice how she never quite turns her back on any customer, always positioning herself where she can see the entire room. Her dress, while clean, shows signs of careful mending. A small patch near the hem where someone's spur caught the fabric, tiny stitches around a tear that might have come from a grabbing hand she had to escape. These aren't just clothes, you realise, they're armour of sorts, designed to be practical, durable, and easily cleaned when the inevitable spills and mishaps occur. The good news is that Mary seems to have earned the respect of the regular customers, who nod politely when she approaches their tables and make room for her to set down their drinks without crowding her. The bad news becomes apparent when you notice how carefully she watches the door, alert for strangers whose intentions and temperament she hasn't yet learned to read. Let your shoulders settle as you observe the delicate dance of frontier hospitality that Mary performs dozens of times each evening. When she approaches a table of cowboys fresh off the trail, she keeps her tone light and friendly, but maintains what you might call a professional distance. "Evening, gentlemen," she might say, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard over the general conversation. "Can I bring you another round, or perhaps something to eat? We've got beans and hardtack, or if you're feeling prosperous, there's bacon to go with it." The cowboys, their faces still bearing the dust and sunburn of weeks on the trail, respond with a mixture of eagerness and awkward politeness that tells you everything about how long it's been since they've had a conversation with a woman. They stumble over their words, suddenly conscious of their rough appearance and rougher language. "Yes, ma'am," one might reply, removing his hat and smoothing his hair with fingers that shake slightly from either nerves or too much rot-gut whiskey. "That sounds real fine, ma'am. Real fine indeed." You begin to understand that Mary's job involves much more than simply serving drinks. She's part entertainer, part therapist, part social director for men who've been isolated from normal human society for months at a time. She listens to stories about home, about families left behind, about dreams of striking it rich and returning east with enough money to buy a farm or start a business. She nods sympathetically when cowboys describe the challenges of the trail. River crossings where they lost cattle, thunderstorms that scattered the herd, the constant worry about Indian raids or rustlers. But you also notice the toll this emotional labour takes on her. Between tables, when she thinks no one is watching, her professional smile fades for just a moment, and you can see the exhaustion in her eyes. She's been on her feet since mid-afternoon, and it's now well past 9 o'clock. Her feet hurt. You can tell by the way she shifts her weight when she stands still for more than a few seconds. The constant need to be charming and attentive, to make every customer feel special and welcome, requires a kind of emotional energy that must be absolutely draining. Take a slow, deep breath as you notice the other women working in this tent saloon, because Mary isn't alone in this challenging profession. Near the back of the tent, partly hidden by shadows, you see an older woman, perhaps 35, which makes her practically elderly by frontier standards. Her name might be Kate, and she's what folks politely call a soiled dove, though you quickly learn that these euphemisms cover a harsh reality. Kate represents the other side of women's work in frontier saloons, the side that proper society prefers not to acknowledge, but that serves a very real need in these overwhelmingly male communities. She's a prostitute, though that word is rarely spoken aloud in polite company. Instead, people refer to sporting women, or ladies of the line, or painted ladies, as if prettier language could somehow soften the harsh realities of her profession. The good news is that Kate appears to be working independently, which gives her more control over her customers and her earnings than women who work for madams in more formal brothels. The bad news is that independence also means she has less protection when things go wrong, and in this business, things go wrong with disturbing frequency. You watch as Kate negotiates with a potential customer, a miner whose clothes are still dusty from his claim. The conversation is conducted in hushed tones, but you can see the careful assessment taking place on both sides. Kate is evaluating whether this man seems safe, sober enough to conduct business properly, and financially capable of paying her fee. The miner, meanwhile, is trying to determine if Kate's prices fit his budget and if she seems healthy enough to risk the encounter. This health question isn't trivial. Sexually transmitted diseases are rampant on the frontier, where medical care is virtually non-existent and prevention methods are primitive at best. Syphilis, in particular, stalks these communities like a silent plague. In the final stages, it attacks the brain, leading to madness and death. Many death certificates of the era list cancer of the brain as the cause of death, but knowledgeable people understand this as a discrete reference to advanced syphilis. Feel your breathing slow as you contemplate the incredible risks these women face simply to survive in this harsh environment. For many, like Kate, prostitution isn't a choice made from a position of strength, but rather the only option available when other means of survival have been exhausted. Some are widows whose husbands died in mining accidents or were killed by Indians. Others were abandoned by men who promised to marry them, leaving them ruined in the eyes of respectable society and unable to find other work. The economics of Kate's situation are brutally simple. She might charge anywhere from $1 to $5 per encounter, depending on the customer's apparent wealth and the level of service requested. That sounds like good money. A cowboy might earn $30 a month, so $5 represents significant purchasing power. But Kate has to split her earnings with the saloon owner, who provides her with a small room in the back of the tent where she can conduct business. She also has to pay for her own food, clothing, and the various tonics and patent medicines she hopes might protect her from disease or prevent unwanted pregnancy. More importantly, Kate's earning potential has a strict expiration date. The combination of hard living, exposure to disease, and the physical toll of her profession means that most women in her situation have only a few years before age, and declining health force them into less lucrative circumstances. The lucky ones might save enough money to retire or marry a customer who's willing to overlook their past. The unlucky ones often end up in what are called cribs, tiny one-room shacks on the outskirts of town where older or less attractive prostitutes serve the poorest customers for whatever they can get. Let your mind settle on the small kindnesses that make life bearable in this harsh environment. You notice that Mary and Kate treat each other with mutual respect and support, despite the social stratification that technically separates saloon girls from prostitutes. When Kate finishes with a customer and emerges looking shaken or upset, Mary finds a moment to check on her quietly, perhaps bringing her a cup of coffee or simply offering a sympathetic word. This solidarity among the women is crucial for survival because the dangers they face are very real. Violence against women is disturbingly common on the frontier, where the usual social constraints that protect women in more civilized areas simply don't exist. Law enforcement is minimal. Dodge City might have one sheriff and a deputy to maintain order over thousands of transient workers and travelers. Courts are rare, and when they do exist, they're often more concerned with property crimes than violence against women, especially women whose virtue is already considered compromised. You witness a small but telling incident when a drunk cowboy becomes too aggressive with Mary, grabbing her arm when she tries to move away from his table. Before she can react, two other customers, men she's apparently served before, stand up and suggest firmly that the cowboy release her and apologize. The tension in the tent spikes for a moment, hands moving instinctively toward weapons, but the drunk cowboy's friends pull him back down to his seat and mumble apologies to Mary. This intervention isn't motivated by chivalry so much as pragmatism. The regular customers understand that the saloon girls are what make this establishment more pleasant than a simple drinking tent, and they have a vested interest in protecting them. A saloon that gets a reputation for allowing its women to be mistreated will find that the women leave for better situations, and customers will follow them to more hospitable establishments. But not all situations resolve so peacefully. You learn through whispered conversations about women who simply disappeared one day, presumably victims of violence they couldn't escape. Others committed suicide when the combined pressures of their situation became unbearable. The frontier newspapers occasionally report these tragedies, though often in veiled language that protects the sensibilities of more respectable readers. Allow the gentle sounds of the evening to wash over you as you notice how the women have developed strategies for staying safe in this dangerous environment. Mary never walks home alone. She's arranged to leave with a group of other workers, or she simply sleeps in the saloon, curled up on a blanket behind the bar where the owner can keep an eye on things. Kate always tells Mary where she's going and when she expects to return, so someone will notice if she doesn't come back. They also maintain what you might call an informal intelligence network, sharing information about which customers are safe and which ones to avoid. A cowboy who got too rough with a woman in one saloon will find that word of his behaviour has somehow spread to other establishments, making it difficult for him to find female companionship anywhere in town. This system of shared information is one of the few forms of protection available to women in a society that offers them little legal recourse when things go wrong. The hygiene challenges these women face would be overwhelming by modern standards. Bathing is a luxury that requires hauling water from the river, heating it over a fire, and finding a private space where they won't be disturbed. Most saloon girls manage a full bath perhaps once a week, and daily washing is limited to whatever they can accomplish with a basin of water and a cloth. Laundry is equally challenging. Their dresses must be washed by hand using harsh lye soap that's rough on both fabric and skin. In winter, clothes frozen on the line might take days to dry. In summer, the constant dust means that anything hanging outside gets dirty again before it's fully dry. Clean clothes are a constant struggle, and most women own only 2 or 3 dresses, rotating them as washing and mending permit. Feel your body relaxing as you contemplate the small luxuries that make life bearable in this challenging environment. A new ribbon for her hair represents a significant investment for Mary, but it helps her maintain the appearance of femininity that's essential to her work. A small bottle of rose water, carefully hoarded and used sparingly, can mask the inevitable odours of frontier life for special occasions. These tiny touches of beauty and refinement become incredibly precious when everything else about life is harsh and utilitarian. The food available to saloon workers is monotonous and often nutritionally inadequate. Meals typically consist of beans, hardtack, and occasionally salt pork or bacon when someone's feeling prosperous. Fresh vegetables are rare and expensive, leading to scurvy and other nutritional deficiencies. Fresh meat is available when someone shoots game, but preservation is challenging without refrigeration, so most protein comes from salted or dried sources. Mary has learned to supplement this basic diet whenever possible. She might trade her services for fresh eggs from a customer who's passing through with a wagon train. She knows which wild plants growing along the river are edible and can add some variety to the endless beans and bread. She saves every penny she can spare to buy small luxuries like coffee or sugar, which can make the difference between a merely filling meal and one that provides some actual pleasure. Water, surprisingly, is often more dangerous than the rot-gut whiskey. The Arkansas River that flows near Dodge City also serves as a dumping ground for all the waste produced by the growing town. Human waste, dead animals, garbage, and runoff from various businesses all contaminate the water supply. Many frontier residents actually consider alcohol safer to drink than water, since the alcohol content kills some of the harmful bacteria that flourish in contaminated water sources. This means that Mary and Kate, like most frontier residents, exist in a constant state of mild dehydration and low-level alcohol consumption. They've learned to pace themselves, drinking just enough to avoid waterborne illness without becoming intoxicated and vulnerable to the dangers that surround them. Let the soft sounds of the settling evening carry you toward peaceful rest as you notice how these remarkable women have created small rituals of comfort and normalcy in their challenging lives. Before the saloon closes each night, Mary takes a few minutes to tidy her appearance, smoothing her hair and straightening her dress. It's a small act of self-respect and dignity that helps her maintain her sense of identity despite the harsh circumstances. Kate, too, has her rituals. After her last customer of the evening, she carefully counts her earnings and sets aside a portion for savings, no matter how small. Even if it's just a few pennies, this act of planning for the future helps her maintain hope that her current situation isn't permanent, that she's working towards something better. The two women often share a cup of coffee before retiring, sitting quietly in the back of the tent as the last customers finish their games and conversation. They don't talk much during these moments. They're both exhausted from the emotional and physical demands of their work. But there's comfort in shared silence, in the simple presence of another woman who understands the unique challenges they face. As the kerosene lanterns begin to burn low and the tent gradually empties of customers, you can feel the day's tension slowly ebbing away. The harsh realities of frontier life remain, but for this moment there's peace. Mary and Kate have survived another day, earned enough money to eat tomorrow, and avoided the worst of the dangers that constantly threaten their safety and well-being. The gentle sounds of the Kansas night begin to filter through the canvas walls, the distant lowing of cattle in the holding pens outside town, the soft whisper of prairie wind through the grass, the occasional call of a night bird. These natural sounds provide a soothing counterpoint to the human dramas that play out within the tent, reminding you that beyond this small island of civilization, the vast frontier continues under the same stars that have watched over countless generations of human struggle and survival. Close your eyes and let these peaceful sounds carry you toward rest, knowing that tomorrow we'll continue exploring this fascinating world where ordinary people found extraordinary ways to create meaning, community, and hope in one of the most challenging environments imaginable. The morning sun rises over Dodge City like a hammer striking an anvil, bringing with it the promise of another day where fortunes can be won or lost in the space between one heartbeat and the next. You wake to find yourself still in that canvas tent saloon, but now the scene is entirely different from the relatively peaceful evening you witnessed before. The air is thick with tension that you can almost taste, sharp and metallic like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. At the faro table in the centre of the tent, a game has been running continuously since yesterday afternoon, and the men clustered around it have the hollow-eyed, desperate look of people who've pushed far beyond the point of rational decision-making. Take a slow, steady breath as you observe this fascinating and dangerous theatre of human behaviour. Faro, you quickly learn, is a game that can destroy a man's life in minutes. Unlike poker, which requires skill and psychology, Faro is essentially a betting game where players wager on which cards will appear from the dealer's specially designed case. It's fast, it's simple to understand even when you're drunk, and it can consume vast sums of money with terrifying speed. The good news is that Faro is considered an honest game when run properly. The odds are clearly defined, and there's less opportunity for the kind of creative cheating that plagues poker games. The bad news is that those clearly defined odds heavily favour the house, meaning that over time, the saloon owner will inevitably collect most of the money wagered at his tables. But it's not the mathematics of the game that creates the electric tension in the air this morning. It's the accusation of cheating that's been hanging over the table like a storm cloud for the past hour. A young cowboy named Jake, his face flushed with alcohol and desperation, has been steadily losing his trail wages to what appears to be an impossibly unlucky streak. His initial stake of $30, a full month's pay, has dwindled to less than $5, and his bets have become increasingly erratic as panic sets in. You can see the exact moment when Jake's fraying nerves finally snap. "That case is crooked," he shouts, pointing an accusing finger at the ornate wooden box from which the dealer has been dispensing cards. "Ain't no way I can lose 17 hands in a row honest." The silence that follows this accusation is so complete you can hear the distant whistle of wind through the prairie grass outside. Every conversation in the tent stops. Every man turns to watch what happens next, because everyone understands that accusations of cheating in frontier gambling establishments tend to be resolved with violence. Let your shoulders relax even as you feel the tension building, because you're about to witness how frontier justice operates when formal law enforcement is hundreds of miles away. The dealer, a thin man with prematurely grey hair and steady hands, doesn't immediately respond to Jake's accusation. Instead, he carefully sets down the cards he's holding and looks around the table at the other players. "Gentlemen," he says quietly, his voice carrying easily in the sudden silence, "I've been running honest games in frontier towns for 15 years. My reputation is the only thing that lets me make a living, and I don't risk it for any man's money, no matter how much he's willing to lose." This is the moment when things could go very wrong, very quickly. Jake's hand is already moving toward the Colt revolver on his hip, and you can see other men subtly positioning themselves to dive for cover if shooting starts. In a world where every man is armed and formal, justice is weeks away by horseback. Accusations of cheating are often settled with what frontier residents grimly call lead therapy. But something interesting happens instead. An older cowboy, grey-bearded and weathered by decades of trail life, stands up slowly from his position at the edge of the crowd. "Son," he says to Jake, his voice carrying the authority of experience, "I've been watching this game since yesterday, and I ain't seen nothing crooked. Sometimes the cards just run against a man. That's the nature of gambling." The older cowboy's intervention gives Jake a face-saving way to back down from a confrontation he probably can't win. More importantly, it prevents the kind of violence that could shut down the saloon and disrupt everyone's entertainment. After a long moment of tension, Jake slowly removes his hand from his weapon and nods reluctantly. "Maybe you're right," he admits, though you can see it costs him considerable pride to make this concession. "Maybe the cards just ain't been kind to me today." Feel your breathing return to a more natural rhythm as you witness this small miracle of frontier diplomacy. Violence has been averted, at least for now, but Jake's problems are far from over. He's lost nearly a month's wages, money he was probably planning to send home to family back east, or use to buy supplies for the next cattle drive. His immediate options are all unpleasant. He can try to borrow money from friends, attempt to find work around town until the next drive, or simply go hungry until better opportunities present themselves. This is the brutal mathematics of frontier gambling that plays out dozens of times each day in saloons across the American West. For every man who wins enough to buy a small ranch or start a business, there are dozens who lose everything they've worked months to earn. The dream of striking it rich through gambling is powerful and seductive, but the reality is that most players leave poorer than they arrived. The psychological appeal of gambling in this environment goes beyond simple greed, though. For men who spend months engaged in backbreaking labour under dangerous conditions, the idea that luck rather than hard work might determine their fate has an almost irresistible attraction. A cowboy who spent weeks dodging stampeding cattle and sleeping on the hard ground under thunderstorms can easily convince himself that he's earned a lucky break, that the universe owes him something better than another month of beans and hardtack. Allow your mind to settle as you notice the other forms of entertainment available in this frontier establishment, because gambling is just one way that saloon patrons try to escape the harsh realities of their daily lives. Near the back of the tent, someone has set up a crude but functional billiards table. Rough wooden boards covered with what was once green felt, now faded and stained by months of use. The game being played isn't quite the billiards you might recognise from modern pool halls. The equipment is improvised and the rules are flexible, adapted to accommodate the limitations of frontier craftsmanship. The cue sticks are hand-carved from whatever wood was available, and the balls are mismatched spheres of various materials, some carved from wood, others made from clay, a few actual ivory balls that someone probably carried west from a more civilized establishment. But despite the primitive equipment, the players demonstrate considerable skill and take their games quite seriously. Small wagers ride on each shot, and the competition is fierce enough to draw crowds of spectators who offer commentary and encouragement with the enthusiasm of modern sports fans. You also notice dice games scattered throughout the tent, ranging from simple chuck-a-luck wheels to more complex betting arrangements that involve multiple dice and mathematical calculations that would challenge a sober man, let alone someone who's been drinking rot-gut whiskey for several hours. These games tend to attract the smaller bettors, men who can't afford the high stakes of the faro table but still want to try their luck against fortune. Take a moment to observe the drinking habits that fuel this culture of gambling and risk-taking, because the connection between alcohol and poor decision-making is as strong on the frontier as anywhere else. The bottles behind the bar contain substances that would horrify modern drinkers, concoctions designed more for maximum intoxicating effect than palatability or safety. The whiskey that Jake has been consuming throughout his disastrous gambling session is typical of frontier establishments, a mixture of raw grain alcohol, burnt sugar for colour, and various additives intended to provide flavour and kick. The bartender might add pepper for heat, tobacco for a woody taste, or even small amounts of strychnine, which in tiny doses acts as a stimulant but in larger quantities becomes deadly poison. The goal isn't to create a smooth, enjoyable drinking experience, but rather to produce something strong enough to provide immediate and powerful intoxication. Men who've been working 16-hour days in brutal conditions want their few hours of recreation to be intense and memorable, even if the memories are somewhat blurry the next morning. Beer, when available, is equally challenging by modern standards. Without refrigeration, it's served at ambient temperature, which in a Kansas summer means roughly the same temperature as a warm bath. The brewing process is often improvised, using whatever ingredients are available locally, and quality control is essentially non-existent. Some frontier beer is reasonably palatable, while other batches might be sour, bitter, or contaminated with bacteria that can cause serious illness. Let your body relax as you notice how the saloon patrons have learned to pace their consumption, because survival on the frontier requires maintaining at least some level of alertness and judgment even during recreational drinking. Total intoxication is a luxury that few can afford when violence, accidents, or other emergencies might arise at any moment. Most experienced drinkers nurse their whiskey slowly, making a single shot last for an hour or more while they engage in conversation or games. They've learned through hard experience that getting too drunk too quickly can lead to disastrous decisions, gambling away money they can't afford to lose, picking fights with men they can't beat, or simply becoming vulnerable to robbery or assault. The physical effects of frontier drinking extend beyond simple intoxication. The harsh additives in rot-gut whiskey can cause severe stomach problems, and many regular drinkers develop chronic digestive issues that plague them for years. The combination of poor nutrition, contaminated water, and toxic alcohol creates a perfect storm of health problems that significantly shorten lifespans throughout the frontier region. You witness the medical realities of frontier life when a commotion near the tent entrance draws your attention to a man stumbling inside with blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. He's obviously been in a fight, and his unsteady gait suggests he's been drinking heavily before, whatever altercation caused his injury. The good news is that frontier communities have developed practical approaches to dealing with common injuries and medical emergencies. The bad news is that these approaches would be considered primitive and dangerous by any modern medical standard. The saloon owner, acting as the closest thing to a medical authority available, examines the wound with hands that haven't been washed since morning. He determines that the cut, while bloody, isn't deep enough to be life-threatening. His treatment consists of pouring whiskey over the wound, both to clean it and to provide pain relief, and then binding it with a strip of fabric torn from what might charitably be called a clean shirt. This represents the state of medical care available to most frontier residents. There are no doctors within hundreds of miles, no hospitals, no antiseptics beyond alcohol, and no pain relievers beyond whiskey, and perhaps some laudanum if someone's wealthy enough to afford it. Serious injuries or illnesses are often death sentences, and even minor problems can become life-threatening if infection sets in. The injured man accepts his crude treatment stoically, understanding that it's the best care available. He'll probably develop a nasty scar, and there's a significant risk of infection that could turn a simple cut into a serious medical emergency. But he's alive, he's mobile, and with luck, he'll heal well enough to continue working and surviving in this harsh environment. Feel your breathing slow as you contemplate the incredible resilience required to survive in a world where a simple accident or illness can quickly become catastrophic. Frontier residents develop a fatalistic attitude toward injury and death that might seem callous to modern sensibilities, but it's actually a necessary psychological adaptation to an environment where danger is constant and help is rarely available. The psychological toll of living with constant risk manifests in various ways throughout the saloon. You notice men with the telltale hand tremor of chronic alcoholism, their nervous systems damaged by years of consuming toxic substances. Others show signs of what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress, the hollow stare of men who've witnessed too much violence, the jumpiness of people who've learned to expect danger at any moment. Many saloon patrons suffer from what frontier residents call prairie madness, a form of depression and anxiety caused by the isolation, hardship, and uncertainty of frontier life. The vast emptiness of the Western landscape can be psychologically overwhelming, especially for people accustomed to the more populated and structured environment of Eastern communities. The saloon serves as an antidote to this psychological isolation, providing human contact and distraction from the mental health challenges that plague frontier communities. Men who might otherwise succumb to despair find reasons to continue living in the camaraderie and entertainment available in these establishments. As the day progresses and the heat inside the tent becomes increasingly oppressive, you notice how the physical environment affects everyone's mood and behaviour. The temperature under the canvas roof climbs well above 100 degrees, and the humidity from dozens of sweating bodies makes the air thick and difficult to breathe. Men remove their shirts and roll up their sleeves, revealing bodies marked by the hard labour of frontier life. You see scars from accidents with tools and livestock, burn marks from campfires and branding irons, and the deep tan lines that come from working outdoors in all weather. These are bodies shaped by physical work, lean and tough, but often bearing the accumulated damage of a lifetime of hard use. The women working in the saloon face additional challenges in this oppressive heat. Their long dresses and multiple layers of undergarments trap body heat, and the need to maintain a feminine appearance prevents them from removing clothing for comfort the way men can. You see Mary and Kate frequently wiping sweat from their faces and necks, and notice how they position themselves near the tent openings whenever possible to catch any available breeze. Let the sounds of this sweltering afternoon wash over you like a slow, heavy tide. There's the constant buzz of flies attracted by spilled drinks and food scraps, the creak of wooden chairs under shifting weight, and the soft whisper of playing cards being shuffled with hands made slippery by perspiration. Conversation becomes more subdued in the heat, and even the gambling seems less frantic as men conserve their energy for the essential business of staying conscious in the stifling air. Despite the oppressive conditions, life in the saloon continues with the stubborn persistence that characterizes all frontier existence. New customers arrive regularly, drawn by the promise of cold drinks that aren't actually cold and entertainment that provides temporary escape from the harsh realities waiting outside the canvas walls. As evening approaches and the sun finally begins its descent toward the western horizon, you can feel the gradual shift in atmosphere that signals the approaching end of another day. The temperature starts to drop from unbearable to merely uncomfortable, and a slight breeze begins to move through the tent, carrying with it the sense of cooking food and distant campfires. The injured man from earlier in the day has found a place to sit in the corner, his bandaged head serving as a visible reminder of how quickly things can go wrong in this environment. But he's alert and seems to be recovering well, and his presence adds to the sense of community that makes these rough establishments more than simple drinking halls. Close your eyes and let the gentle evening sounds carry you toward peaceful rest, the soft murmur of tired conversations, the occasional clink of coins on wooden tables, and underneath it all the eternal whisper of prairie wind moving through grass that stretches endlessly toward horizons that promise both opportunity and danger in equal measure. As autumn settles over Dodge City like a gentle, worn blanket, you find yourself witnessing the intricate web of economic relationships that keeps this frontier establishment alive through the changing seasons. The canvas walls of the saloon now ripple in the cooler October wind, and you can feel the subtle shift in atmosphere that comes when the brutal heat of summer finally releases its grip on the Kansas plains. The good news is that the approaching winter brings relief from the oppressive temperatures that made summer life nearly unbearable inside the tent. The bad news becomes apparent as you notice how many familiar faces have already disappeared, headed south with the last cattle drives of the season, or moving on to winter jobs in warmer climates where work might still be available. Let your breathing slow and deepen as you observe how dramatically the saloon's clientele changes with the seasons, because these establishments exist at the mercy of economic cycles as unpredictable as prairie weather during the peak cattle season from spring through early fall. Money flows through these tents like water through a broken dam. Cowboys flush with trail wages, railroad workers with steady paychecks, and successful miners with pockets full of silver create a temporary prosperity that can make saloon owners wealthy almost overnight. But winter tells a different story entirely. You watch as the saloon owner, a shrewd man named Thompson, whose weathered face reflects decades of frontier business experience, carefully counts the evening's receipts with the worried expression of someone who knows that lean months lie ahead. The handful of coins and crumpled bills in his strongbox represents not just today's profit, but potentially the difference between keeping his establishment running through the winter or closing down until spring brings new opportunities. Thompson has learned through hard experience that successful frontier businesses require careful planning for the inevitable boom and bust cycles that define Western economic life. During the flush summer months, he sets aside a portion of every day's earnings in a hidden cache that will sustain him through the winter when customers become scarce and every dollar becomes precious. You notice how his business model reflects the harsh realities of frontier economics in ways that would surprise modern entrepreneurs. Thompson doesn't actually own the land where his saloon sits. Like most frontier businesses, he simply claimed a good spot and erected his tent, knowing that formal property ownership is a luxury that will come later when the town becomes more established and civilization catches up to the frontier. His inventory is a study in frontier pragmatism. The bottles behind the bar contain mostly locally produced spirits of questionable quality because shipping real whiskey from established distilleries back east costs more than most customers are willing or able to pay. Thompson has learned to mix his own rotgut using grain alcohol purchased from farmers who've set up crude stills, adding his own blend of flavorings and additives to create something that provides the desired intoxicating effect at a price his customers can afford. Feel your shoulders relaxing as you contemplate the surprisingly complex supply chains that keep frontier establishments stocked with necessities. The playing cards scattered across the gaming tables arrived via wagon train from Kansas City, along with the few bottles of genuine Eastern whiskey that Thompson reserves for his wealthiest customers. The tobacco that patrons stuff into their pipes and roll into cigarettes comes from Virginia and North Carolina, travelling hundreds of miles over rough roads to reach this remote outpost. Even more fascinating is how Thompson manages his relationships with suppliers and creditors in an environment where formal banking barely exists and credit arrangements depend entirely on personal reputation and mutual trust. The grain alcohol he purchases from local farmers is often bought on credit, with payment promised when the next cattle drive brings fresh money to town. His suppliers understand that frontier businesses operate on seasonal cycles, and they're usually willing to extend credit to established operators like Thompson who've proven their reliability over multiple seasons. The women working in Thompson's establishment exist within their own complex economic ecosystem that parallels but doesn't quite intersect with the broader frontier economy. Mary, the saloon girl you've been observing, operates under a revenue-sharing arrangement that gives her a percentage of the drinks she sells while also allowing her to keep whatever tips customers provide for her dancing and conversation services. During busy summer months, Mary might earn the equivalent of $60 or $70 in modern purchasing power, enough to live comfortably by frontier standards and even save a modest amount for the future. But winter brings a dramatic reduction in both customers and earnings, and she must carefully budget her summer income to survive the lean months when entertainment is a luxury few can afford. Mary has developed a secondary income stream that demonstrates the entrepreneurial spirit necessary for frontier survival. She's learned to read and write, skills that are surprisingly rare among both men and women in these communities, and she supplements her saloon earnings by writing letters for illiterate customers who want to communicate with family back east. For 25 cents, she'll compose a letter describing the writer's adventures and current circumstances, adding the kind of personal touches and emotional expression that transform simple news into meaningful communication. Allow your mind to settle on the fascinating social hierarchies that exist even within these rough frontier establishments, because despite the democratic atmosphere of shared hardship, clear distinctions of class and status influence every interaction you witness. At the top of the local social structure sits Thompson himself, whose ownership of a successful business and reputation for fair dealing give him considerable influence in community affairs. Just below Thompson are what might be called the respectable customers, successful ranchers, prosperous merchants, and skilled professionals like the town's blacksmith or carpenter. These men typically have steady incomes, established reputations, and the kind of social standing that commands respect even in the egalitarian atmosphere of the frontier. They often receive better service, preferred seating at gaming tables, and first access to any luxury items that arrive in town. The middle tier consists of working cowboys, railroad employees, and successful miners, men who have steady work and regular income but lack the accumulated wealth or social connections of the upper tier. They form the bulk of the saloon's customer base and represent the solid foundation of Thompson's business model. At the bottom of the hierarchy are the drifters, failed miners, and men down on their luck who frequent the saloon when they have money but often survive on the edges of the community when they don't. These men might work odd jobs around town, sleep in the stable behind the saloon, or simply disappear when their resources run out and they move on to try their luck elsewhere. The women working in the establishment exist largely outside this male-dominated hierarchy, though they've developed their own informal status system based on age, appearance, earning potential, and length of time in the community. Mary, as a popular saloon girl with regular customers and a reputation for honesty, commands more respect and better treatment than newer arrivals or women whose circumstances have forced them into less desirable situations. Take a slow, peaceful breath as you observe how money actually flows through this frontier establishment, because the financial relationships are far more complex than simple cash transactions. Thompson operates what amounts to an informal banking system for his customers, extending credit to reliable patrons during lean periods and accepting various forms of payment beyond simple currency. A cowboy short of cash might trade his saddle or pistol for drinking money, with Thompson holding the items as collateral until the debt is repaid. Miners sometimes pay with small amounts of raw silver or gold, which Thompson then trades to travelling merchants for goods and supplies. Farmers might settle their tabs with grain, vegetables, or other food products that Thompson can use to feed his workers or resell to other customers. This barter economy reflects the chronic shortage of actual currency that plagues most frontier communities. Banks are rare, and those that exist are often hundreds of miles away in larger cities. Most business transactions involve some combination of cash, credit, and trade goods, creating a complex web of mutual obligation and trust that binds the community together. The seasonal rhythms that govern frontier life become particularly apparent as winter approaches and you watch Thompson prepare his establishment for the challenging months ahead. The tent that provided adequate shelter during the warmer months must now be reinforced against wind, snow, and freezing temperatures that can drop well below zero on the Kansas plains. Thompson and his workers spend October adding extra layers of canvas to the walls, installing a larger wood-burning stove for heat, and stockpiling fuel for the long winter ahead. The crude wooden floor is covered with whatever rugs, blankets, or animal hides can be obtained to provide insulation against the frozen ground. More challenging is the problem of maintaining inventory when supply routes become unreliable due to winter weather. Thompson must stockpile enough alcohol, tobacco, food and other necessities to last through months when wagon trains can't get through and local suppliers may be unable to deliver goods. This requires both significant capital investment and accurate prediction of winter demand. Guess wrong, and he might run out of essential supplies or tie up too much money in inventory that won't sell. Feel your body settling into deeper relaxation as you notice how the approaching winter affects the behavior and relationships of everyone in the saloon. There's a sense of drawing together for mutual support that becomes more pronounced as the weather turns colder and the community becomes more isolated from the outside world. Regular customers begin spending more time in the saloon, not just for entertainment, but for warmth and companionship during the long, dark winter evenings. Men who might have worked outdoors all day during summer months now gather around the stove to play cards, tell stories, and simply enjoy the company of other people during the psychological challenges of winter isolation. Mary and Kate, the women working in the establishment, face their own seasonal adjustments. The elaborate dresses that were practical during warm weather must now be supplemented with whatever warm clothing they can obtain or improvise. More challenging is the psychological adjustment to months of reduced income and fewer customers, creating financial stress that compounds the natural depression that comes with shortened days and limited sunlight. The social dynamics of the saloon also shift during winter months as the temporary population of seasonal workers disappears and only the permanent residents remain. This creates a more intimate, family-like atmosphere where everyone knows everyone else's business and long-term relationships become more important than the casual interactions that characterize the busy summer season. You observe fascinating examples of frontier cooperation as community members work together to ensure everyone's survival through the challenging winter months. Thompson allows men who can't pay for rooms to sleep in the saloon in exchange for work maintaining the establishment, splitting firewood, or helping with other necessary tasks. Mary organises informal communal meals where everyone contributes whatever food they can obtain, creating hearty stews and soups that provide both nutrition and social connection. These arrangements reflect the fundamental frontier understanding that individual survival often depends on community cooperation. The harsh environment doesn't allow for the kind of social Darwinism that might operate in more forgiving climates. When survival is uncertain for everyone, mutual aid becomes not just morally appropriate but practically necessary. The economic relationships that sustain the saloon through winter also reveal the entrepreneurial creativity that characterizes successful frontier businesses. Thompson begins hosting evening entertainment events, storytelling competitions, music performances, and community discussions that provide social value while encouraging customers to purchase drinks and extend their visits. He also develops what would now be called seasonal product offerings, selling hot toddies and warm drinks that provide both alcohol and heating value during cold evenings. His kitchen begins offering hearty winter meals designed to appeal to men who've been working outdoors in freezing weather and want substantial warming food rather than the light snacks that were popular during summer. Let the gentle sounds of winter preparation wash over you like a soft, steady rhythm. There's the whisper of wind through canvas walls, the crackling of the wood stove, and the quiet conversations of people settling in for the long months ahead. These sounds create a cocoon of warmth and safety against the vast, cold prairie that stretches endlessly beyond the fragile shelter of the tent. The psychological comfort provided by the saloon becomes even more valuable during winter months when the isolation and hardship of frontier life can drive people to despair or madness. The warm light from kerosene lanterns, the companionship of familiar faces, and the simple pleasure of conversation and games provide crucial mental health support for a community that has no other forms of entertainment or social services. Thompson understands that his business serves functions far beyond simple profit-making during these challenging months. He's providing a crucial community service that helps maintain the psychological and social health of the entire settlement. This awareness influences his business decisions in subtle but important ways. He might extend credit longer than strictly prudent or maintain services that aren't immediately profitable because he understands their broader value to community survival. As you prepare to rest and let these images of frontier economics and seasonal adaptation settle in your mind, take a moment to appreciate the incredible complexity and resilience of these frontier communities. Despite operating without banks, formal contracts, reliable supply chains, or government services, they've created economic and social systems that enable survival and even prosperity in one of the most challenging environments imaginable. The gentle sounds of evening in the winter-ready saloons surround you as your eyes grow heavy, the soft murmur of men sharing stories around the stove, the occasional clink of coins on wooden tables, and the comforting crackle of burning wood that promises warmth through the cold night ahead. Let these peaceful sounds carry you toward rest, knowing that tomorrow we'll conclude our journey through this fascinating world with the story of how these rough frontier establishments eventually gave way to the more civilized communities that would follow. The spring of 1885 arrives in Dodge City with the distant whistle of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, a sound that carries across the prairie like the voice of the future calling to a world that's about to change forever. You wake to find yourself still in Thompson's saloon, but everything feels different now, charged with the electricity of transformation that comes when one era ends and another begins. The good news is that the railroad brings unprecedented prosperity, connecting this remote frontier outpost to markets and civilization in ways that seemed impossible just a few years ago. The bad news becomes clear as you realize that this same railroad will ultimately spell the end for establishments like Thompson's Tent Saloon and the rough democratic culture they represented. Let your shoulders settle as you observe the dramatic changes already visible throughout Dodge City. Where once there were scattered tents and hastily constructed wooden buildings, you now see the foundations being laid for substantial brick and stone structures. The Santa Fe Railroad has established a major depot here, and with it comes a flood of new residents, new businesses, and new expectations about what a proper community should look like. Thompson stands outside his canvas establishment, watching a crew of workers laying the foundation for what will become the Dodge House, a 3-story hotel that will offer luxuries previously unimaginable in this frontier town. Private rooms with actual beds, dining rooms with tablecloths and silverware, and parlours where respectable ladies can socialise without fear of encountering the rough characters who frequent establishments like his saloon. You can see the worry in Thompson's weathered face as he contemplates his future in this rapidly changing environment. The tent that served him well for over a decade now looks shabby and temporary compared to the substantial buildings rising around it. The city fathers, mostly successful merchants and railroad officials, have begun talking about cleaning up Dodge City's image to attract the kind of respectable families and businesses that will ensure continued growth and prosperity. These conversations about respectability carry ominous implications for Thompson's business model. The very qualities that made his saloon successful, its democratic atmosphere, its tolerance for rough behaviour, its willingness to serve anyone with money regardless of their social standing, are increasingly seen as obstacles to the kind of progress that civic leaders envision for their community. Feel your breathing slow and deepen as you witness Thompson making one of the most difficult decisions of his life. Rather than fight against the tide of change, he's chosen to adapt, using his accumulated savings to purchase a lot on the newly platted Front Street, where he'll construct a proper wooden building to house his establishment. It's a massive financial gamble that will consume most of his carefully hoarded resources, but he understands that businesses which fail to adapt to changing circumstances simply disappear. The new Long Branch Saloon for Thompson has decided to adopt the name of the most famous drinking establishment in Dodge City, represents a dramatic evolution from its humble tent origins. The wooden building features a proper plank floor, plastered walls, and large windows that let in natural light during the day. Behind the bar, Thompson has installed an ornate mirror imported from Kansas City, along with shelves lined with bottles of genuine Eastern whiskey that arrived via railroad rather than wagon train. But even as Thompson adapts his business to meet changing expectations, you can sense that deeper transformations are undermining the very foundations of frontier saloon culture. The steady stream of seasonal workers who formed the core of his customer base is beginning to diminish as the cattle industry itself evolves. The great cattle drives that brought thousands of cowboys through Dodge City each summer are becoming less frequent as railroads extend into Texas, allowing ranchers to ship their herds directly to market without the long, dangerous trail drives that once defined Western commerce. The mining booms that sent prospectors streaming through frontier towns are also reaching their natural conclusions as the easily accessible deposits of gold and silver are exhausted. Many boom towns that supported dozens of saloons just a few years ago are now virtually deserted. Their populations moved on to seek opportunities elsewhere or returned east to more stable employment. Allow your mind to settle on the personal stories of transformation and adaptation that play out within these broader historical changes. Mary, the saloon girl you've watched navigate the challenges of frontier life, faces particularly difficult choices as the nature of her work evolves along with the community around her. The respectability movement that's transforming Dodge City views women like Mary with increasing suspicion and disapproval. The tolerant attitude towards saloon girls that characterized the early frontier, when any woman brave enough to work in such establishments was grudgingly respected for her courage and independence, is giving way to more conventional Victorian moral standards that classify all women associated with saloons as fallen and disreputable. Mary responds to these changing circumstances with the same practical intelligence that sustained her through years of frontier hardship. She's saved enough money to open a small boarding house that will cater to the railroad workers and travelling salesmen who represent Dodge City's new economic foundation. It's respectable work that will allow her to maintain her independence while avoiding the social stigma increasingly attached to saloon employment. But the transition isn't easy. Mary's new boarding house requires skills and knowledge quite different from those she developed as a saloon girl. She must learn to manage multiple employees, maintain detailed financial records, and navigate the complex social expectations that govern relationships between respectable businesses and their customers. Most challenging of all, she must reinvent her public persona, transforming herself from Mary the saloon girl into Mrs. Mary Wilson, respectable proprietress and pillar of the community. Kate, the older woman whose circumstances forced her into prostitution, faces even more difficult challenges as frontier society becomes more conventional and judgmental. The informal tolerance that allowed women in her situation to work openly in saloons disappears as civic leaders attempt to create a community that will attract respectable families. Kate and women like her are increasingly pushed into hidden underground establishments or forced to leave town entirely in search of communities that still tolerate their presence. Some, like Kate, simply disappear from the historical record, whether they found new opportunities elsewhere, married customers willing to overlook their past, or succumbed to the violence and disease that constantly threatened women in their profession, we'll never know. Their stories remind us that the progress and civilization that transformed frontier communities came at a cost, often paid by the most vulnerable members of society. Take a gentle breath as you observe the broader cultural forces reshaping not just Dodge City, but frontier communities throughout the American West. The temperance movement, led primarily by women who followed the railroad west to establish proper homes and families, view saloons as the root of most social problems plaguing Western communities. These temperance advocates organise prayer meetings outside saloon doors, petition local governments to restrict liquor licences, and work tirelessly to convince their neighbours that alcohol consumption is incompatible with the kind of civilised society they hope to build. Their arguments find increasingly receptive audiences among business leaders who recognise that Eastern investors and potential residents are reluctant to establish themselves in communities with reputations for lawlessness and vice. The political influence of the temperance movement grows steadily as more women and families settle in formerly male-dominated frontier towns. By the 1890s, many Western communities have implemented restrictions on saloon hours, prohibited gambling, and banned the employment of women in drinking establishments. These regulations represent the beginning of the end for the freewheeling culture that characterized the frontier saloon era. Thompson adapts to these changing regulations as best he can, removing the gambling tables from his establishment and focusing more heavily on serving food and providing entertainment that appeals to respectable customers. He hires a piano player to provide musical entertainment in the evenings and begins hosting community events like church socials and political meetings that help establish his saloon as a legitimate part of the town's social infrastructure. But these adaptations can't fully address the fundamental changes occurring in American society's relationship with alcohol and public recreation. The Progressive Era brings new ideas about social improvement and moral reform that view traditional saloon culture as a relic of a more primitive time that must be eliminated for society to advance. Feel your body relaxing as you witness the gradual but inexorable transformation of frontier saloons from rough democratic gathering places into more regulated conventional establishments. By the 1890s, many Western saloons look remarkably similar to their Eastern counterparts. Formal bars with polished brass fixtures, elaborate decorations, and strict rules about behavior and dress that would have seemed absurd to the cowboys and miners who frequented these establishments during their early days. The new saloons serve higher quality alcohol at higher prices to customers with steadier incomes and more conventional expectations about service and atmosphere. The gambling that once formed a central part of saloon culture is either eliminated entirely or relegated to hidden back rooms where it can be conducted away from the disapproving eyes of respectable society. Most significantly, women are increasingly excluded from these establishments altogether. The saloon girls who once provided entertainment and companionship for lonely frontier workers are replaced by male bartenders and servers, while the prostitutes who worked in or around saloons are driven into separate, segregated districts where their activities can be contained and controlled. This exclusion of women represents a fundamental shift in the social function of saloons, where they once served as inclusive community centres where all members of frontier society could gather regardless of their social standing or personal circumstances. They now become exclusively male spaces that reinforce rather than challenge conventional social hierarchies. Allow the peaceful sounds of a summer evening in 1895 to wash over you as you observe Thompson, now in his 60s, reflecting on the dramatic changes that have transformed both his business and his community over the past 2 decades. His Long Branch Saloon is now a substantial establishment that serves quality food and drink to railroad workers, travelling salesmen, and local businessmen in an atmosphere of relative respectability and order. Gone are the tent walls that once fluttered in the prairie wind, replaced by solid wooden construction that provides genuine comfort and protection from the elements. Gone, too, are the faro tables where fortunes were won and lost in single evenings, the saloon girls who danced with lonely cowboys, and the democratic mixing of social classes that characterized frontier society. Thompson has achieved a level of financial security and social respectability that would have seemed impossible during his early days as a tent saloon operator. His establishment is profitable, his reputation is solid, and his position in the community is secure. But there's a note of melancholy in his demeanour as he contemplates what's been lost in the process of gaining so much. The sense of adventure, possibility, and genuine equality that characterized frontier saloon culture has largely disappeared, replaced by the more predictable but also more constrained patterns of conventional society. The men who gather in Thompson's saloon now are more prosperous and better behaved than their frontier predecessors, but they're also somehow smaller, more limited by social expectations and economic calculations that leave little room for the grand gestures and dramatic risks that defined the earlier era. As the new century approaches, even Thompson's adapted establishment faces growing pressure from the prohibition movement that's gaining strength throughout Kansas and much of the American West. The same moral reform impulses that transformed saloons from rough frontier gathering places into respectable drinking establishments are now questioning whether any form of alcohol consumption can be reconciled with a truly civilized society. The irony isn't lost on Thompson that the very success of his adaptation efforts has made possible the further social progress that now threatens his livelihood entirely. By helping to create more orderly, respectable communities, establishments like his have paved the way for citizens who believe that such communities would be even better without saloons altogether. Let your breathing settle into the slow, peaceful rhythm of approaching rest as you contemplate the end of the Wild West saloon era. On January 16, 1920, the 18th Amendment to the Constitution takes effect, prohibiting the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages throughout the United States. With the stroke of a pen, an entire way of life that sustained millions of Americans for over half a century becomes illegal overnight. Thompson's Long Branch Saloon, along with thousands of similar establishments across the American West, closes its doors forever. The building that housed so many memories and witnessed so much history becomes a general store, then a restaurant, and eventually disappears entirely as Dodge City continues its evolution into a modern American community. The men and women who created and sustained frontier saloon culture scatter to pursue new opportunities in a world that no longer has room for their particular skills and experiences. Some successfully adapt to new circumstances, like Mary with her boarding house, while others simply fade into historical obscurity, their stories preserved only in fading photographs and yellowed newspaper accounts. But their legacy lives on in ways both obvious and subtle. The democratic spirit that characterized frontier saloons, the idea that all people deserve respect and opportunity regardless of their background or circumstances, becomes part of the broader American character. The entrepreneurial creativity that allowed people like Thompson to build successful businesses from nothing but canvas and determination contributes to the innovative spirit that drives American economic development. Most importantly, the resilience and mutual support that enabled frontier communities to survive and prosper in some of the harshest conditions imaginable demonstrates the incredible capacity of human beings to create meaning, connection, and hope even in the most challenging circumstances. As you rest and let these final images settle in your mind, take a moment to consider what the story of Wild West saloons tells us about our own times. Like those frontier communities, we face rapid technological and social changes that transform our world in ways we can barely understand, let alone control. We struggle with questions about how to balance individual freedom with community responsibility, how to preserve what's valuable from the past while embracing necessary progress, and how to maintain human connection and dignity in an increasingly complex and impersonal world. The people who gathered in Thompson's tent saloon more than a century ago were ordinary human beings facing extraordinary challenges with courage, creativity, and an unshakable belief in their ability to build something better from whatever materials they had at hand. Their story reminds us that every generation must find its own way to create community, meaning, and hope, and that the human capacity for adaptation and survival is far greater than we sometimes imagine. The gentle sounds of history settling into memory surround you now. The whisper of prairie wind through canvas walls that no longer exist. The soft murmur of conversations in languages and dialects long forgotten. The distant whistle of trains that once carried dreamers and adventurers toward horizons bright with possibility. Let these peaceful echoes carry you toward rest, knowing that the courage, resilience, and hope that sustained our predecessors through their challenges continues to flow through our own lives, connecting us across time to the endless human story of survival, adaptation, and the search for home in an uncertain world. Close your eyes and breathe deeply, feeling gratitude for the comfort and safety that surround you tonight, and for the countless unknown people whose struggles and sacrifices made possible the world we inhabit today. Their stories live on in every act of kindness, every moment of courage, and every decision to build something positive from whatever circumstances we face, reminding us that we too are part of the great ongoing adventure of human community and connection that stretches from the first, flickering campfires of our ancestors to the gentle lights that guide us safely through each night toward tomorrow's possibilities.